Thornfield Manor, autumn 1811. The season's most anticipated ball arrived with the brittle chill that signaled London's return to full social splendor. For most young ladies, it was an evening of possibility: silk gowns catching candlelight, dance cards filling with eligible names, and the whispered promise of advantageous matches. For Miss Erin Dawson, it marked what she prayed would not be her final appearance in polite society. The ballroom blazed with opulence, crystal chandeliers casting unforgiving light across marble floors and the jeweled throats of England's finest families. Erin pressed herself against the shadow of a Grecian column, her mother's lavender gown a relic from better times. The fabric had been carefully altered, patches hidden beneath strategic gathers, the hem let down to cover where sections had been sold to pay the butcher's bill. "Miss Dawson, shall I fetch you some punch?" asked elderly Lady Beatrice, one of the few souls who still acknowledged her presence. "You're very kind, but no," Erin replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm perfectly well." Perfectly well * was the lie she'd rehearsed in the cracked mirror of their rented rooms. It shattered the moment her heel caught the decorative urn. The sound of tearing fabric cut through the music like a scream. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned with the synchronized cruelty of a flock of ravens spotting carrion. Erin looked down to see her skirt's hem dangling, the hidden repairs now visible to every critical eye, mismatched thread forming ugly patterns across faded silk, the desperate needlework of poverty laid bare under chandelier light. The first laugh came from somewhere near the refreshment table, then another. Within moments, the sound built into a wave of barely concealed mockery. "Good heavens!" Lady Cordelia Ashworth's voice rang clear and sharp, designed to carry. "How desperate one must be to wear rags to Thornfield." "Hello, dear friends. Before we begin this extraordinary story, make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I've seen better fabric in the rag and bone man's cart." Laughter rippled outward. Erin stood frozen, her face burning, her hands instinctively moving to cover the damage, but there was too much to hide. She could feel every eye assessing her, cataloging her failure, her poverty, her unworthiness to stand among them. "Move," she commanded herself. "Walk away with dignity." But her legs had turned to stone. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The room tilted and swam before her eyes, the glittering crowd becoming a blur of hostile faces and gleaming jewels. Then the crowd began to part. The whispers changed pitch from mockery to something else: shock, perhaps, or fear. Erin looked up through the haze of her humiliation to see a figure approaching. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black save for the stark white of his cravat, he moved through the ballroom with the unhurried confidence of a man who had long ceased caring what society thought of him. Christopher Hanson. The Duke of Blackthorn. Erin had never seen him in person, few had, in recent years. But his reputation preceded him like winter frost. The Iron Duke, they called him. Banished from court under a cloud of scandal. Accused of violence. Rumored to have murdered his own fiancée in a fit of rage. He attended society functions so rarely that his appearance tonight had been the subject of fevered speculation among the chaperones. And now he was walking directly toward her. The room held its collective breath. Lady Cordelia took an instinctive step backward. Even the orchestra faltered, the violins trailing into uncertain silence. Christopher stopped before Erin, his pale eyes, the color of winter ice, meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Without a word, without asking permission, he removed his evening coat and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body, carrying the scent of sandalwood and something darker, leather, perhaps, or wood smoke. "Dance with me," he said. It was not a request. Not an invitation. It was a command spoken in a voice that had ordered men into battle and terrified Parliament itself. Erin's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She was aware of hundreds of eyes upon them, of Lady Cordelia's scandalized gasp, of the Duchess of Somerset clutching her pearls as though witnessing something profane. Christopher extended his hand. Still, she hesitated. "Unless," he added, his voice dropping to a tone only she could hear, a hint of dark amusement flickering in those cold eyes, "you would prefer to continue standing here while they dissect you like carrion." That broke through her paralysis. With trembling fingers, Erin placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and utterly certain. He led her onto the floor as the orchestra, responding to some invisible command, launched into a waltz. The crowd parted before them like the Red Sea, faces frozen in shock and fascination. Erin was acutely aware of his coat enveloping her, hiding the damage to her gown. Of his hand at her waist, steady and sure. Of the way he held her gaze as though she were the only person in the room. "You're shaking," he observed, his tone neither kind nor cruel, merely factual. "I'm not accustomed to being rescued by notorious dukes," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Notorious." The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "An interesting choice of word. Tell me, Miss Dawson." "Erin Dawson." "Miss Dawson." He guided her through a turn with practiced ease. "Are you aware that you've just become the most talked about woman in London?" "I believe I already was," she replied, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice, though perhaps not for reasons I would have chosen. No. His eyes studied her with unsettling focus. "Then perhaps you'll be grateful to know that by tomorrow morning, no one will remember your torn gown. They'll only remember that the Iron Duke chose you to dance with. That I ignored every available heiress and diamond of the first water to claim a wallflower no one else wanted." There was something calculating in his expression, something that made Erin's spine stiffen despite her gratitude. "Why?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Why would you do this?" "Because, Miss Dawson," Christopher said softly, his breath warm against her ear as he drew her closer through the final turn of the waltz, "I need a wife. And you, I suspect, need salvation. If you can spare me 5 minutes on the terrace, I believe we can reach an arrangement that will benefit us both." The music ended. The ballroom erupted in a buzz of frenzied whispers. And Erin realized with crystal clarity that her humiliation had somehow become the beginning of something far more dangerous than anything she'd imagined. The terrace air was sharp with autumn cold, a mercy against Erin's flushed cheeks. Christopher stood with his back to the ballroom's glow, his face half-shadowed, watching her with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting for his opponents to reveal their hand. "You're asking me to marry you," Erin said slowly, "to help you reclaim your title from your cousin. To appear before the Queen's court as evidence of your stability." "I'm offering you a solution to your rather public predicament," Christopher corrected. 1 year. A performance for the benefit of those who matter. After the dukedom is secured, an annulment. You'll be provided for, naturally. Naturally, the word tasted bitter. Erin looked back through the glass doors where silhouettes moved like shadows in a puppet theater, all watching for her return. There would be no return, not to the life she'd known. The torn gown had seen to that. And what constitutes being provided for, in your estimation or grace? Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. A generous settlement. Enough to live comfortably. Specifics, please. Erin folded her arms, grateful for the weight of his coat still around her shoulders. "I find that men's definitions of generous and comfortable vary considerably based on whether they're the ones paying or receiving." Christopher's mouth curved slightly, direct. "I appreciate that. Name your terms, Miss Dawson." "My father's debts. All of them. Paid in full before the wedding." She counted on her fingers, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "A trust fund for my brother Thomas, enough to complete his education at Cambridge and establish himself in a respectable profession. A cottage for my parents, deed in my father's name, in the countryside. Sussex, preferably. Far enough from London that they won't be touched by scandal. That's substantial. You're asking me to tie my name to yours when half of London believes you murdered your last fiancé," Erin said quietly. "That seems substantial as well." The silence stretched taut between them. Christopher's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A short, harsh sound. "You don't flinch, do you?" Even from the ugly truths. He studied her with renewed interest. "Very well. Your terms are acceptable. My solicitor will draw up a contract. We'll marry within the week. One more condition." Erin stepped closer, lifting her chin to meet his eyes. "If your cousin threatens my family, if he uses them against you in any way, the arrangement ends immediately. and you ensure their protection that I won't have them destroyed because I agreed to help you." Christopher extended his hand. "You have my word." "And Miss Dawson?" "For a woman who entered this ballroom apologizing for her existence, you negotiate like a barrister." Aaron took his hand, feeling the weight of what she'd just agreed to settle over her like a shroud. "I've learned that no one else will fight for what I need, Your Grace. I may as well do it myself, then we understand each other perfectly." His grip tightened briefly before releasing her. "I'll send word tomorrow. Until then, I suggest you prepare for what comes next. London has just discovered you exist. They won't let you disappear quietly again." St. Margaret's Chapel was chosen for its discretion rather than its beauty. The small stone building sat in the shadow of Westminster, frequented by clerks and minor gentry seeking quiet ceremonies away from society's prying eyes. On a grey morning 6 days after the Thornfield Ball, Erin Dawson became the Duchess of Blackthorn in a service that lasted less than 15 minutes. She wore a gown borrowed from Dr. Whitmore's sister, a practical woman who asked no questions and required no explanations. The pale blue silk hung slightly loose at the waist, smelling faintly of lavender and camphor. No flowers adorned the altar. No music accompanied her short walk down the aisle. Only the witnesses required by law attended, Dr. Whitmore himself, stern-faced and silent, and Mr. Pemberton, Christopher's elderly solicitor, who handed them each a pen to sign the register with hands that trembled slightly. Christopher stood at the altar in black, his expression unreadable. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, his kiss was perfunctory, a brief press of lips against hers, cold and formal as a signature on parchment that it's done. He said quietly, as though speaking to himself. The wedding breakfast took place in a private room at Claridge's, attended by the same 4 people who'd witnessed the ceremony. Crystal and silver gleamed on white linen, an absurd elegance for such a somber occasion. Erin pushed food around her plate, unable to swallow past the tightness in her throat. Across from her, Christopher consumed his meal with mechanical efficiency, his attention fixed on some distant point beyond the window. Dr. Whitmore attempted conversation once. "The weather should hold for your journey north." "Indeed," Christopher replied, and that was the end of it. Pemberton departed first, murmuring congratulations that sounded more like condolences. Dr. Whitmore lingered a moment longer, his eyes searching Erin's face with something that might have been concern. "Your Grace," he said softly, addressing her by her new title for the first time. "If you should need anything." "She won't," Christopher interrupted, his tone flat. "Thank you, James. I'll send word when we're settled at Ravenswood." The hotel suite they'd taken for the night was opulent and suffocating. Erin stood in the center of the sitting room, still wearing the borrowed gown, her new wedding ring heavy on her finger, a thick band of gold that Christopher had produced from his pocket without ceremony. "Your chambers are through there," Christopher said, gesturing to one of 3 doors. "I've had your belongings sent ahead to Ravenswood. We depart at dawn." He moved toward the opposite door, already loosening his cravat. "Your Grace," Erin began, uncertain what she meant to say. That he paused, his hand on the door frame, but didn't turn to face her. "We both signed the contract, Miss Dawson. We know the terms. There's nothing more to discuss tonight." The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed like a cell door locking. Erin stood alone in the too large room, a duchess in borrowed silk, married to a stranger who couldn't bear to look at her, and wondered what exactly she'd sold herself into. The journey north unfolded in silence, broken only by the rhythm of hoofbeats and the creak of carriage springs. Christopher sat across from Erin, his attention absorbed by correspondence he produced from a leather case, his pen scratching across paper as though she didn't exist. They stopped at coaching inns where he arranged separate rooms without discussion, departing each morning before the sun fully rose. By the 3rd day, Erin had learned not to attempt conversation. Yorkshire announced itself in the changing landscape, the gentle hills giving way to wild, windswept moors where heather clung to rocky soil and the sky pressed low and grey. The air turned colder, carrying the scent of peat and distant rain. Erin pulled her cloak tighter, watching through the window as civilization seemed to fall away with each passing mile. Then Ravenswood emerged from the mist like something conjured from a Gothic novel. The manor sprawled across a hilltop, all grey stone and sharp angles, its windows dark and watching. Towers rose at each corner, their crenellations jagged against the brooding sky. Ancient oaks surrounded it, their branches twisted and bare, and beyond stretched the moors endless, empty, and utterly isolated. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Christopher said, the first words he'd spoken to her in hours. There was no warmth in his voice, only bitter irony. The carriage rolled to a stop before the massive oak doors. A handful of servants materialized, far fewer than an estate this size should warrant. At their head stood a woman whose severe black dress and iron-gray hair spoke of decades in service. Her eyes, sharp as flint, assessed Aaron with undisguised skepticism. "Mrs. Hollowell," Christopher said, descending first and offering Aaron his hand with mechanical courtesy. "My wife, the Duchess of Blackthorn." "Your Grace." Mrs. Hollowell's curtsy was correct but minimal. "I've prepared the Duchess's chambers as instructed. The household is at your disposal, though I'm afraid we're rather reduced these days." Reduced was a charitable description. Aaron counted perhaps 6 servants total, where a manor this size should employ dozens. A young man with dark, watchful eyes stood apart from the others, his working clothes marking him as groundskeeper rather than house staff. "James tends the estate grounds," Christopher explained, following her gaze. One of the few who remained when circumstances changed. James met Aaron's eyes briefly, and something in his expression, pity, perhaps, or warning, made her skin prickle. "Dr. Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his travel-worn appearance suggesting he'd ridden hard to arrive before them. "Christopher." "Your Grace," he nodded to Aaron. "I've taken the liberty of examining the west wing as you requested. The damage is extensive." "Later, James." Christopher's tone brooked no argument. He turned to Mrs. Hollowell. "Show the Duchess to her chambers. I'll be in my study." He disappeared into the manor's dark interior without another glance. Mrs. Hollowell gestured for Aaron to follow, her expression suggesting this was already a familiar pattern. As they crossed the threshold, Dr. Whitmore caught Aaron's arm gently. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "A word of advice, Your Grace. Ravenswood keeps its secrets. Be careful which doors you open, and trust that some rooms are locked for good reason." The heavy doors closed behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The Duchess's chambers occupied the entire east wing's second floor, accessible through a heavy door that Mrs. Hollowell unlocked with a key drawn from the chatelaine at her waist. The hinges groaned in protest, and the air that escaped smelled of dust and time and something sweeter, dried lavender, perhaps, or rose petals gone to powder. "These rooms have been closed since the late Duchess passed," Mrs. Hollowell said, her voice carefully neutral. "His Grace instructed they be opened for you. I've had the linens changed and fires laid, but otherwise everything remains as it was." The sitting room was frozen in time. Pale morning light filtered through windows shrouded in gauze curtains, illuminating furniture draped in holland covers like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. A writing desk stood near the window, its surface still cluttered with inkwell and quills. A book lay open on a side table, its pages yellowed but marking someone's interrupted reading from 2 decades past. "Why wasn't this cleared?" Aaron asked, running her finger along the desk's edge, leaving a trail in the dust. Mrs. Hollowell's expression hardened. "His Grace forbade it. Said his mother's things were to remain undisturbed." She moved to the bedroom door, pushing it open. "Your trunks are here. Ring if you require anything." The housekeeper departed with unsettling haste, as though reluctant to linger in these rooms. Aaron stood alone in the preserved tomb of a woman she'd never known, feeling like an intruder in borrowed space. The bedroom was equally untouched, a canopied bed with faded blue hangings, a vanity still holding silver brushes and bottles of perfume gone viscous with age. A wardrobe stood half open, revealing gowns in styles 20 years out of fashion. Aaron moved through the space slowly, careful not to disturb the silence that felt almost sacred. The writing desk drew her back. Something about its cluttered surface suggested abandonment rather than arrangement, a pen laid down mid-sentence, never retrieved. She lifted the book from the side table. Shakespeare's sonnets, well worn. Then her eyes caught the edge of leather protruding from the desk's middle drawer. A journal. Dark burgundy leather, its pages thick with ink. Erin's hands trembled as she opened it. The entries were dated, the last from October 1791, written in an increasingly frantic hand that deteriorated over the final pages. She flipped to the end, where the writing stopped mid-page, October 14, 1791. He knows what I've discovered. I saw it in Vincent's eyes today when he looked at the ledgers I'd left deliberately visible. He suspects I understand what he's done, the forgeries, the altered documents that would make him heir if anything should happen to my husband and Christopher. I must protect my son from this truth, even if it costs me everything. If these are my last words, let them stand as testimony. Vincent Hansen is not what he claims. The danger comes not from Christopher's temper, but from the entry ended there, the final letters trailing into an ink blot as though the pen had been dropped suddenly. Erin's breath caught. She flipped back through earlier entries, finding references to discrepancies in the estate accounts, and Vincent's unusual interest in family documents. The late Duchess had been investigating the same conspiracy that would later destroy her son's reputation, and then she had died. Suddenly. Mysteriously. Of an illness that came on without warning, Erin clutched the journal to her chest, her heart racing. Christopher's dark reputation, his banishment from court, the whispers of violence. What if it had all been constructed to hide the truth about who the real monster was? Vincent Hansen arrived 3 days later with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already his. His carriage, far grander than Christopher's own, swept up the drive accompanied by 2 others bearing a magistrate, a court clerk, and 3 men Erin didn't recognize. Lord Vincent himself was handsome in a polished way that made her instinctively distrust him, his smile too practiced, his eyes calculating as they assessed Ravenswood's crumbling grandeur. Christopher, he called out with false warmth as he entered the great hall uninvited. And the new Duchess. How unexpected. Though I confess I'm concerned about the haste of your marriage. It suggests a certain instability of mind. Christopher stood rigid near the fireplace, his jaw tight. State your business, Vincent. Business? Vincent produced a leather portfolio, handing documents to the magistrate, a nervous man named Pettigrew who looked deeply uncomfortable with his role. I'm here out of familial concern. These gentlemen have sworn statements attesting to your erratic behavior, your violent temperament, your unsuitability to hold the dukedom. I'm petitioning to have you declared mentally unfit, for your own protection. The hearing convened immediately, Vincent having apparently bribed or coerced the magistrate into expediting proceedings. The great hall became an impromptu courtroom, its vaulted ceiling and ancestral portraits bearing witness to the systematic dismantling of Christopher's character. The first witness claimed to have seen Christopher threaten a tenant farmer. The second swore he'd destroyed property in a rage. The third, a former servant, described violent outbursts and paranoid accusations. Each testimony was carefully crafted, just plausible enough to seem credible. Dr. Whitmore had coached Erin that morning in frantic whispers. Speak to his character. His restraint. Don't let Vincent bait you into emotion. When called to testify, Erin rose on unsteady legs. She described Christopher's courtesy, his careful consideration, his complete control even in difficult circumstances. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, fueled by anger at the transparent manipulation unfolding before her. Then Vincent smiled, and Erin's stomach dropped. Your Grace, he said with false sympathy, you've known my cousin for less than a fortnight. Hardly time to judge his true nature. He gestured to his clerk, who produced a familiar bundle of fabric. I present evidence that suggests the Duke has already begun to damage his new bride's reputation and well-being. Erin's torn lavender gown lay across the magistrate's table like an accusation. This, Vincent continued, was retrieved from Thornfield Manor after the ball where my cousin so dramatically claimed Miss Dawson, as she was then, as his bride. A gown torn to pieces, the lady herself trembling and terrified. Witnesses reported she could barely stand. And within days, she was rushed into marriage. One might ask what drove such desperate haste. The implication hung poisonous in the air. Erin felt her face burn. "I'll ask you directly, Your Grace," Vincent said, his tone dripping false concern. "Did my cousin coerce you into this marriage? Did he threaten you or your family? You're safe now. You can speak freely." The great hall fell silent. Christopher's face had gone pale, his hands clenched at his sides. Dr. Whitmore half rose from his seat. Even the magistrate leaned forward, waiting. Erin met Vincent's eyes and saw the trap laid bare. If she denied coercion, she'd seem complicit in Christopher's supposed madness. If she admitted any pressure, she'd condemn her husband. So she told the truth. The magistrate adjourned the hearing without rendering judgment, promising a decision within a fortnight. Vincent departed with a victor's smile, his carriage disappearing into the twilight as though he'd already claimed Ravenswood as his own. The great hall emptied slowly, servants retreating to whispered conversations in distant corners, leaving Erin and Christopher alone among the dying fires. Christopher stood motionless before the hearth, staring into flames that cast harsh shadows across his face. His control, that iron discipline that had held him rigid through hours of character assassination, finally began to fracture. His hands trembled as he gripped the mantelpiece, knuckles white against dark stone. "You shouldn't have defended me," he said quietly, his voice raw. "Vincent will make you pay for that. He's already trying to destroy us both." Erin moved closer, still clutching the torn gown Vincent had wielded like a weapon. The truth seemed preferable to his lies. Christopher laughed, a hollow sound. "The truth? You don't know the truth, Erin. You know what I've allowed you to see: a duke fighting for his title, a convenient marriage, a business arrangement." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "You don't know about Helena." The name fell between them like a stone into still water. "Lady Helena Ashford," he continued, each word seeming to cost him. "My fiancée. She died 2 years ago, falling from Ravenswood's North Tower. And everyone's society, the courts, even the Queen's advisors believes I pushed her, but you didn't. That it wasn't a question." Erin had read enough of his mother's journal to understand the pattern of accusations built on lies. "I was in London. 20 witnesses can place me at Parliament that day." Christopher's jaw tightened. "But I was the last person she'd quarreled with before I left. Servants heard us arguing. She was found at the base of the tower wearing the dress she'd worn during our fight." The conclusion seemed obvious that he moved to the windows, staring out at the darkening moors. "What they don't know, what I've never told anyone except James, is why we quarreled. Helena had found discrepancies in the estate ledgers. She was clever with numbers, always reviewing the accounts, making sure the steward wasn't cheating us. She'd discovered that Vincent had been embezzling for years, forging documents, positioning himself to claim the dukedom if anything happened to me. She was going to expose him." Erin breathed, understanding flooding through her. She wanted to go to the authorities immediately. "I argued for caution. Vincent was family, I needed proof. Rushing to accusations would destroy whatever remained of the Hanson name." His reflection in the dark glass looked haunted. "I left for London to consult with solicitors about how to proceed legally. 3 days later, she was dead." The silence stretched taut. Erin thought of the journal upstairs, of Christopher's mother making the same discoveries, meeting the same fate. Why didn't you tell them what she'd found? Why accept blame for murder rather than reveal? Because Helena's reputation would have been destroyed along with Vincent's freedom. Christopher's voice cracked. They would have said she was a hysterical woman making wild accusations, or worse, that she was complicit in embezzlement and I'd killed her to silence her. Her family would have been ruined by association. The scandal would have touched her younger sisters, destroyed their prospects. He turned to face Erin fully, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "So I let them believe I was violent, unstable, capable of murder. Better my name be blackened than hers." Erin crossed the distance between them, the torn gown falling forgotten from her hands. "You've been protecting a dead woman's honor for 2 years while your own life crumbled. She deserved better than to be remembered as the fool who threatened a thief and paid with her life." Christopher's control finally shattered completely. His voice broke. She deserved better than me, she deserved justice, Aaron said firmly. And so do you. So did your mother. She gripped his arms, forcing him to meet her eyes. Christopher, your mother discovered the same thing Helena did. It's in her journal she wrote about Vincent's forgeries, his manipulation of inheritance documents. She died suddenly of illness after confronting him. Don't you see? He's been systematically murdering anyone who threatens to expose him, then using their deaths to destroy your reputation. Christopher stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes, grief giving way to terrible understanding. My mother. I always wondered. The physician said her heart simply failed, but she was healthy, strong. And then within a year, Vincent was whispering that I'd driven her to her grave with my temper, my difficult nature. He's been building this narrative for 20 years, Aaron said. Every death, every tragedy he's turned them into weapons against you. And you've let him, because you were too busy protecting everyone else to protect yourself. For a long moment, Christopher simply looked at her, as though seeing her clearly for the first time since their hasty wedding. Then, slowly, he covered her hands with his own. Why are you still here? He asked quietly. You could have told Vincent I coerced you. Ended this arrangement, saved yourself. Because, Aaron said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice, someone should finally stand with you instead of using you as a shield for their own purposes. Even if that someone is just a bankrupt girl in a borrowed wedding dress who married you for her brother's education. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile touched Christopher's lips. A bankrupt girl who negotiates like a barrister and faces down corrupt lords without flinching. We make quite a pair, then. A ruined duchess and a supposedly murderous duke. Aaron managed a shaky laugh. Vincent must be terrified of what we might accomplish together. He should be, Christopher said, and this time the smile reached his eyes. Because unlike Helena, unlike my mother, you're not alone in this. And neither am I. Aaron spent the next 4 days buried in documents that Dr. Whitmore smuggled from the estate's locked archives. The physician proved unexpectedly invaluable. He'd been Christopher's mother's doctor and had kept meticulous records that he'd never been permitted to share. Now he spread them across the library table alongside the Duchess's journal, Helena's letters, and 20 years of estate ledgers that told a story of systematic theft. Look here, Aaron said, pointing to an entry in the late Duchess's handwriting. She documented purchasing foxglove for the garden in April 1791. But her symptoms that autumn: rapid heartbeat, confusion, nausea, they're consistent with digitalis poisoning. Foxglove. Dr. Whitmore leaned closer, his expression grim. I treated her during those final weeks. I documented irregular heartbeat, visual disturbances. At the time, I attributed it to heart failure, but you're right, these align perfectly with digitalis toxicity. His voice dropped. Someone was poisoning her slowly, making it appear natural. Christopher entered carrying another box of papers, his shirt sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled from hours of searching dusty archives. The careful distance he'd maintained since their wedding had dissolved entirely in the urgency of their investigation. He set the box down heavily. Helena's correspondence with her solicitor. She'd begun documenting everything. Dates Vincent accessed the strongbox, discrepancies in land deeds, witness statements from tenants he'd bribed. Aaron sorted through the letters, her heart racing. Helena's neat script detailed a pattern of fraud stretching back decades. Vincent had forged their grandfather's signature on a codicil naming him as secondary heir. He'd altered property records to make it appear Christopher's father had approved selling ancestral land sales that had lined Vincent's pockets. And when Helena threatened to expose him, she'd written to her solicitor the day before her death, I fear suspects what I know. If anything should happen to me, these documents prove. The letter ended there, never sent. She knew she was in danger, Aaron whispered. And she stayed at Ravenswood anyway, trying to gather more proof. Christopher's face had gone pale. She stayed because of me. Because I told her we needed to be absolutely certain before making accusations. His voice broke. I killed her with my caution. No. Aaron crossed to him, gripping his hands. Vincent killed her because she was brave enough to threaten his stolen legacy. Just as he killed your mother. The guilt belongs to him alone. But what do we do with this? Dr. Whitmore gestured at the damning evidence spread before them. Vincent has the magistrate in his pocket. If we present this now, he'll claim the documents are forgeries, that Christopher fabricated everything out of desperation. It becomes our word against his, and Christopher's reputation is already destroyed. Then we don't present it to a corrupted magistrate, Aaron said slowly, an idea forming. We take it directly to the Queen's court. Force a formal inquiry where Vincent can't hide behind bought officials and false witnesses. Christopher stared at her. That's an enormous risk. If we fail, if the court sides with Vincent, I lose everything, title, lands, freedom. He could have me committed to an asylum based on the hearing testimony. And if we do nothing? Aaron challenged. Vincent gets his decision from Pettigrew in 10 days, and you lose everything anyway. At least this way, we fight. The library fell silent except for the crackle of fire. Christopher looked at the evidence they'd compiled, then at Aaron, something shifting in his expression, trust, perhaps, or the beginning of something more dangerous than their careful arrangement had allowed. You're right, he said finally. We go to London. We demand an audience with the Queen's advisors. We lay everything bare. He moved closer to Aaron, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I don't know what I did to deserve you as an ally, Aaron Dawson. Hanson, she corrected softly. Aaron Hanson. Your wife, remember. In name if not yet in, she stopped, suddenly aware of how close they stood, of his eyes on hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with legal strategy. In what? Christopher asked quietly, his hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. Aaron's breath caught. In the ways that usually matter in a marriage. Perhaps, Christopher said, his voice rough, we should reconsider what matters. The Queen's chamber at St. James's Palace was smaller than Aaron had imagined, but infinitely more intimidating. 3 of Her Majesty's senior advisors sat behind an ornate table, their powdered wigs and ceremonial robes lending gravity to proceedings that would determine Christopher's fate. Queen Charlotte herself observed from a raised seat, her aged face impassive, her eyes missing nothing. Vincent sat with his solicitor, the picture of wounded nobility. When Christopher and Aaron entered with Dr. Whitmore and their evidence, his expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been fear. The hearing proceeded with agonizing formality. Christopher presented the estate ledgers, the forged documents, his mother's journal. Dr. Whitmore testified to the symptoms of digitalis poisoning. Aaron described finding Helena's correspondence, the pattern of deaths surrounding anyone who discovered Vincent's fraud. Then Vincent struck. Your Majesty, my lords, he said with practiced sorrow, producing a packet of letters. I present evidence that the Duchess herself has been coerced into this performance. These letters, written in her own hand, describe threats made against her life by my cousin. She writes of fearing for her safety, of being trapped in a marriage to a violent man. Aaron's blood turned to ice. The letters were laid before the advisors, her handwriting, or a masterful forgery of it, detailing abuse that had never happened. This is a desperate fabrication, Christopher began, but Lord Ashford, the senior advisor, raised his hand. We will hear from the Duchess herself. His eyes settled on Aaron with uncomfortable intensity. Your Grace, did you write these letters? The chamber fell silent. Vincent's smile was subtle, triumphant. He believed he'd cornered her, either she admitted writing them and destroyed Christopher, or she denied it and appeared complicit in fraud. Aaron rose, her legs steadier than she'd expected. She thought of the wallflower in the torn gown, trembling as society laughed. That girl had apologized for existing. The woman standing before the Queen's court had learned to fight. I did not write those letters, my lords. They are forgeries, skilled ones, I'll grant, but forgeries nonetheless. She turned to face Vincent directly. Lord Vincent has proven himself quite adept at falsifying documents over the years. He forged his grandfather's signature to alter inheritance terms. He forged my husband's father's approval on land sales. Why should forging my handwriting prove any more difficult? These are wild accusations, Vincent began. No, Erin interrupted, her voice ringing clear. They are documented facts supported by 20 years of evidence. But more than that, they are distractions from a simple truth. She turned back to the advisors. Lord Vincent asks if I was coerced into this marriage. I will answer with absolute honesty, yes. I was coerced, by poverty, by desperation, by the knowledge that my family faced ruin. The Duke of Blackthorn offered me a business arrangement, and I accepted it because I had no other choice. Christopher's sharp intake of breath was audible. Vincent's smile returned. But coercion and choice are not opposites, Erin continued. I chose to accept his offer. I chose to stand beside him when his cousin attempted to have him declared unfit. I chose to investigate the deaths of his mother and his fiancée. And I choose, now, to tell you that Christopher Hansen is not the monster his reputation suggests. He is a man who has spent 2 years accepting blame for murders he didn't commit because he valued others' reputations above his own freedom. Her voice strengthened. He is a man who married a ruined woman in a torn gown because he saw in her what she couldn't see in herself, worth. And he is my husband, in all the ways that matter, regardless of what our original contract stipulated. The Queen leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable. Lord Vincent would have you believe Christopher threatened me, Erin said quietly. The truth is far simpler, Christopher saved me. And now I'm returning the favor. Lord Ashford reviewed the documents again, conferring with his fellow advisors in hushed tones. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, he spoke. This court finds the evidence of systematic fraud compelling and credible. Lord Vincent Hansen, you will be detained pending criminal investigation. Christopher Hansen, Duke of Blackthorn, your title and lands are hereby restored, all accusations dismissed. He paused. Your Grace, your loyalty to your husband is noteworthy. Not loyalty, my lord, Erin corrected. Love. The word fell into silence. Christopher's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with shock. Later, in their rooms at Claridge's, Christopher built a fire while Erin retrieved the marriage contract from her trunk. They'd spoken little since leaving the palace, both exhausted, both uncertain what came next. Erin, Christopher began, but she pressed the contract into his hands. Read Clause 7, she said. His eyes scanned the page. After 1 year of marriage, should both parties agree, an annulment may be sought, burn it. Christopher looked up sharply. You don't have to, I know what I have to do, Erin interrupted. I'm choosing what I want to do. There's a difference. She took the contract from him and held it to the flames. The paper caught, curling and blackening. I told the Queen's Court the truth today. Our marriage is real. So let's stop pretending it isn't. Christopher caught her hand as the last of the contract crumbled to ash. I don't deserve you. Perhaps not, Erin said, allowing herself to smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. We negotiated terms, remember? I'm quite thorough about contracts. He laughed a real laugh, free of bitterness, and pulled her into his arms. Then allow me to renegotiate. You are not my convenient wife, Erin Hansen. You are my Duchess. And I am yours for real, for always, for whatever comes next. She kissed him then, there in the firelight, and felt the last walls between them finally fall away. Outside, London carried on, unaware that the ruined Wallflower and the Iron Duke had just begun their real story, the one written not in contract terms, but in choice, trust, and something far more dangerous than either had bargained for. Love.